Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's my pleasure. I work in the Universidade Autonoma de Lisboa, so I teach here. And what I'm going to talk about in the next 10 minutes, it's a little bit about NATO. Okay, and I will try to explain why we should look for a new dimension in the south border or the south part of NATO. I have a couple of speaking notes, and I'm going to follow some of them. But what is more important for me and the end of the conclusion of my study is that NATO has to have a new approach for the South, okay? Because normally the border south of NATO is the Mediterranean Sea, and it goes a little bit further to the south. But in my view, that's not correct. And in my view, what I'm going to explain is that we need another vision, we need another strategy, because NATO should look further to the south, be more engaged in the Atlantic South, which is completely out of area of concerning for the NATO. And in my view, it makes sense to have a new vision, a new strategy related with this approach. The North Atlantic are facing now one of the biggest challenges in the history of the 75 years. Last summit last week what was very challenging for all the countries. And of course, we are facing now a lot of problems and mostly a lot of questions about what is the next step. Why should NATO be engaged in a global way? We know that the Atlantic Alliance is the oldest military alliance in the world and is become the center of gravity for our countries, at least for Portugal. NATO is very important. I mean, I will put NATO as the most important organization concerning our security and defense. And that's why I think the majority of the countries that are also playing with NATO, they feel the same. And that's also why we need to look NATO for a new dimension, a new approach. So in this last 75 years, lots of discussion about NATO, regional NATO, global NATO, borders about NATO, flank. I don't like the terminology of flank. Flank means something very static, okay? And nothing is static anymore. Nothing is static anymore. And of course, we are facing now Ukraine, Russia, Gaza Strip, Israel, Iran. We are facing a lot of regional conflicts, and NATO are now more than ever, I would say, facing challenging in the new dimension and mostly what is the role of NATO in this new order. So the alliance is very important for us. The alliance is very important for the regional global security. And of course, we need to be more focused on NATO because NATO still as the most important organization in related with the security and defense in Europe, and I would say in the world. And of course, we have to look for the new dimensions of the conflict, not anymore land, sea, and air. We have to talk about cybersecurity. We have to talk about space. We have to look for the new dimensions of the conflict. And in the last summit, you all remember that we are increasing our investments on defense. We are now talking about 5% of our GDP, which is more than the double for the most of the countries until 2030. And of course, this brings new responsibilities, and this brings also the opportunity to have another vision, another strategy for another regional areas. And when we talk about NATO, we talk about regional and southern border of NATO, looking for what we call the close neighborhood. It means until it focus mostly about the Mediterranean area and the Sahel. But it makes no sense because now we are facing a lot of threats, a lot of challenges, and the security is not able to look for this kind of borders specifically in this area. And we need to know what we can do to improve the security in these areas. Because as we all know, the insecurity in the Sahel is the problem for Europe, is a problem for the alliance also. So we need to be aware. We need at least to understand what's happening in these regions. And that's why, in my view, the NATO should have a strategy. And if you have a strategy, you have a concern. If you have a strategy, you have to look what's happening in these areas and look for answers to your challenge and to your questions. I don't know if you are aware, but NATO 2 years ago, they built what we can call a think tank, a small think tank to study what is our major threats in the South. And some of these threats and some of these ideas came with, of course, terrorism, traffic of weapons, and the most of these problems we already know. But these problems, they don't see under a deep dimension. They see only in the logical, very teeny area that goes only to the Mediterranean Sea and the Sahel the most. And in my view, I think we should look for the Atlantic South. And let me be frank. When China going to be a naval base in the Atlantic South, and this is going to happen very soon, all the game will change. And NATO is not aware about what's happening in the Atlantic South. And this my comment, in my view, is that we need to have a more global view for the South, what I call the Deep South. Okay, so we need to be engaged in the Deep South because the Deep South is where the new dimensions of the geopolitics will be, I would say, more challenging. I'm talking about China. Of course, I can talk also about Russia. As you all know, Russia is one of the biggest players in Africa, and we don't know about what's happening in Africa. NATO doesn't know what's happening in Africa with this concern. So this report, I have the report here. It's 33 pages, and these 33 pages, they show some aspects that we already know. But my comments is that the report is not, I will not say well done, because of course it's well done, but not entirely to the south part of the Atlantic. And they should be to the South Atlantic to be more aware about what's happening in this area. Of course, this report was presented in Washington, and of course, in all these summits, the South flank was always some references. Not the last summit, because the last summit in Hague, the final declaration, there's only 2 pages, and nothing specifically about what is the role of NATO in the south part of the Atlantic. And this is my concern, and this is what I can underline. And I'm going to finish, and I will need to develop a little bit more about what is the Deep South, okay? But in my view, the Deep South is the entirely South, until, of course, Africa, Horn of Africa, South Mediterranean, Atlantic, South Atlantic, all these areas, they should be part of the South Atlantic and part of the flank. I don't like the term flank, okay? It's a little bit old-fashioned concept. We need to be aware about what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Mali, what's happening in the Gulf of Guinea, what's happening in this Brazil, for example. Okay, this is outside of our scope. This is outside of our radar, and we need to be more aware about this. So my last recommendations is that NATO should be more aware. They should have a special envoy for Africa. Okay, we don't have nothing about NATO in Africa. Not a single department, not a single person that represents NATO in Africa. And this is something that I would like to mention. We need to do assessments. We need to make a sort of summits with the African countries. We need to understand better what's happening in the Gulf of Guinea. We need to expand our regional influence in these areas. We need to review the NATO Strategic Direction South mandate. Okay, and we need to be more focused about the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, the Mediterranean Dialogue, and a couple of organizations. And thank you for your attention. And my last comment is that I've been talking about this, and I hope that NATO can, of course, the priority should be Ukraine and should be Russia and the Pacific, but not forget the South, because the South Atlantic going to be part of the decisions, of the geopolitical decision in the next years. Thank you very much.
Thank